2 weeks after the night, Kelechi raised his voice for the first time in their marriage. Ngozi found herself standing outside Adaeze's boutique in Ikeja, watching her friend through the glass window as she rearranged a rack of Ankara gowns with the effortless grace of a woman who had never once, in 8 years, given anyone reason to suspect her of anything. From the outside, it was just a friend visiting another friend's shop on a slow Tuesday afternoon. From the inside, it was the continuation of a slow, deliberate unraveling that neither woman fully understood the true shape of, though only one of them was steering it. "You came," Adaeze said, smiling as the bell above the door chimed. She wiped her hands on her apron and pulled Ngozi into a tight embrace, the kind that lingered a second too long, the kind that felt like comfort but was, in truth, control. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me with all this drama at home." "There's no forgetting you, Ada," Ngozi said, forcing a small laugh as she sank into the plastic chair by the counter. "You're the only sane thing left in my life right now." The words, innocent as they sounded, landed in Adaeze's chest like a small, private victory. She turned away briefly to hide the satisfaction tugging at the corner of her mouth, then busied herself preparing 2 cups of zobo from the flask she kept behind the counter. "Tell me everything," she said, settling into the chair across from her friend. "Don't leave anything out." And Ngozi, starved for understanding, drowning in a marriage that suddenly felt like a courtroom she couldn't win, told her everything. She told her about the argument 2 weeks prior, how Kelechi's voice had cracked with frustration when she asked about the client meeting, how he had slept in the guest room for the first time in their entire marriage, how the children had noticed the tension and grown unusually quiet at the dinner table. She told her about the nights she now lay awake, scrolling through old photos on her phone, searching for some clue she might have missed, some sign that the man she married had always been capable of becoming a stranger. Adaeze listened to all of it with the practiced patience of a woman gathering evidence, nodding at all the right moments, gasping softly at all the right details, occasionally reaching across the counter to squeeze her friend's hand. "You know," Adaeze said carefully, once Ngozi had finished, "I ran into him last week." Ngozi's head snapped up. "Kelechi? Where?" "At the bank on Awolowo Road," Adaeze said smoothly, the lie sliding out with practiced ease, though the truth was far more intimate than a chance encounter at a banking hall. "He looked stressed, distracted. I asked if everything was fine and he just laughed it off, said work was heavy. But Ngozi, something about his eyes, I don't know. It didn't sit right with me." It was, of course, a carefully constructed half-truth. She had not run into Kelechi by accident. She had arranged to meet him there, using the excuse of needing a reference letter for a business loan, an excuse Kelechi, ever the helpful friend to his wife's closest confidant, had agreed to without hesitation. What followed the bank visit? A lunch that stretched into 2 hours at a quiet restaurant nearby, a conversation that drifted from business advice into things far more personal, was something Adaeze had no intention of ever sharing with Ngozi. "What do you mean, it didn't sit right with you?" Ngozi asked, her voice tightening with a familiar, dreadful anxiety. Adaeze shrugged delicately, letting the silence stretch just long enough to do its damage. "I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But you know men, Ngozi, when they start hiding stress, it's usually because the stress is something they can't explain to their wives without consequences." By the time Ngozi left the boutique that evening, her chest felt heavier than when she'd arrived, though she couldn't have said exactly why. She had come seeking comfort and left carrying a new weight entirely, a weight carefully placed there by the one person she trusted to lighten her burdens, not add to them. At home that night, Kelechi sat at the dining table reviewing invoices from his logistics company, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, the picture of a tired but ordinary husband at the end of an ordinary day. When Ngozi walked in, he looked up and offered a small, tentative smile, the kind of smile a man gives when he is trying, carefully, to rebuild a bridge that had started swaying beneath him. "How was your day?" he asked. "Fine," Ngozi said, setting her bag down slower than necessary. "I saw Ada today." "That's nice," Kelechi said, returning his attention to the papers in front of him, though something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "She said she saw you at the bank last week." Kelechi looked up again, his brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah, she needed a reference for a loan. I helped her fill out some forms." "Why?" "No reason," Ngozi said, though her tone suggested there was very much a reason. "Just didn't know you two still talked outside of when I'm around." Kelechi set his pen down slowly, exhaling the particular exhaustion of a man who felt, more and more, like every word out of his mouth was being weighed against some invisible scale of guilt. "Ngozi, she's your best friend. Of course we talk sometimes. I'm not going to be rude to her just because she calls me for something small." "I'm not saying you should be rude," Ngozi said, her voice rising slightly, despite her efforts to stay calm. "I'm just saying it feels like I'm always the last to know about these conversations." "Because they're not conversations that matter," Kelechi said, his own frustration beginning to surface. "I helped fill out a bank form, Ngozi. That's it. I'm not hiding a relationship. I'm hiding paperwork for someone who's like a sister to you." The word sister hung in the air between them, heavy with an irony neither of them could yet recognize. "I just feel like I don't know you anymore," Ngozi whispered, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, despite her best efforts to hold them back. "Everything feels different, distant. Like you're somewhere else even when you're sitting right in front of me." Kelechi's frustration softened instantly at the sight of her tears, guilt replacing irritation in his chest. He rose from the table and crossed the room, pulling her gently into his arms, despite the tension still lingering between them. "I'm right here," he murmured into her hair. "I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this is, whatever's happening to us, I want to fix it. I love you, Ngozi. That has never changed." For a brief, fragile moment, standing in his arms in the quiet of their dining room, Ngozi allowed herself to believe him completely. The doubts, the whispers, the carefully placed seeds of suspicion, all of it faded, if only for a few minutes, beneath the familiar warmth of her husband's embrace. But seeds, once planted, do not simply disappear because a moment of tenderness interrupts their growth. They wait, patient and persistent, for the next opportunity to resume their slow, quiet takeover. That opportunity arrived 3 days later in the form of a phone left unattended on the kitchen counter while Kelechi showered upstairs. Ngozi stood beside it for a long time, staring at the dark screen, her heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and desperation. She had never once, in 8 years of marriage, gone through her husband's phone. It had never even occurred to her before the last 3 months. But the whispers in her mind, whispers that had grown so loud they now sounded indistinguishable from her own voice, urged her forward. "Check it," they said. "Just once, just to be sure. If there's nothing there, you'll finally have peace." Her fingers trembled as she picked up the phone, the screen lighting up to reveal a lock code she didn't know. She stood there, frozen, staring at the 4 empty boxes waiting for a password, feeling like a stranger in her own home. She tried his birthday, wrong. She tried their wedding anniversary, wrong. She tried the children's birth years combined. Wrong again, the phone briefly flashing a warning about too many failed attempts. Defeated, humiliated by her own desperation, she set the phone back down, exactly where she'd found it, and hurried away from the counter, just as she heard the shower shut off upstairs. When Kelechi came down minutes later, toweling his hair, he found his wife sitting at the dining table with a cup of untouched tea, her eyes distant, her hands still trembling faintly in her lap. She told Adaeze about the failed attempt the very next day, expecting comfort, expecting perhaps a gentle scolding for invading her husband's privacy. Instead, what she received was something far more calculated. "Try his old number," Adaeze suggested casually, sipping her drink without looking up. The one he had before you two got married. Men rarely change their passwords from the numbers that mean something to them. Ngozi frowned. How would you even know his old number? For the briefest moment, something flickered across Adaeze's face. A flash of panic, quickly smoothed over by practiced composure. You mentioned it once, years ago, when you were telling me the story of how you two met. Something about how he used the same number pattern for everything back then. It was a lie, delivered so smoothly that Ngozi didn't think to question it. The truth was far simpler and far more damning. Adaeze knew Kelechi's old number because she had, months earlier, watched him unlock his phone during one of their private meetings, memorizing the code without a second thought, filing it away like every other small, intimate detail she had been collecting about the man she was determined to have. That night, Ngozi tried the old number pattern, and to her horror, the phone unlocked on the first attempt. She did not know what she expected to find. Perhaps she had hoped for nothing at all, some quiet confirmation that would finally let her sleep peacefully again. Instead, scrolling quickly through his messages with trembling hands, she found a thread of texts between Kelechi and a contact saved simply as A. The messages were, on the surface, entirely professional. Discussions about a supplier discount, a thank you message for advice about a business loan, a joke about Lagos traffic that made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name, but it was the timestamps that unsettled her most. Messages exchanged late at night, well past 11, well past midnight on some occasions, long after Ngozi herself had gone to sleep, believing her husband was doing the same beside her. She did not recognize the number, had no way of confirming who A truly was, but something cold and certain settled into her stomach as she stared at that single letter glowing on the screen. She locked the phone and set it back exactly where she'd found it, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it twice. She did not sleep at all that night. The next morning, she called Adaeze before she had even brushed her teeth, her voice trembling as she recounted what she'd found. Adaeze listened in silence, letting Ngozi's fear build with every passing second of quiet on the line. "Eh," Adaeze finally repeated, her voice carefully measured, carrying just the right amount of concern to mask the storm raging beneath her composed exterior. "That could be anyone, Ngozi. Don't jump to conclusions yet." "But the late-night messages, Ada. Who talks business at midnight?" "I don't know," Adaeze said softly, and for the first time in the entire conversation, there was truth in her voice, though not the kind Ngozi could recognize. She did know exactly who A was. She had saved her own name that way in his phone herself, an idea she'd planted under the guise of discretion, of protecting Ngozi's feelings should she ever glance at his screen. "But I think," Adaeze continued, "it might be time to hire someone, a private investigator, just to be sure, for your own peace of mind." The suggestion landed like a spark on dry grass. "A private investigator," Ngozi repeated, the idea both terrifying and in a strange way, comforting. If someone else could uncover the truth, she wouldn't have to keep torturing herself with half answers and stolen glances at a locked phone. "I know someone," Adaeze said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "A man named Chuka. He's discreet. He's done this kind of work before. I can get you his number." What Ngozi did not know, could not have possibly known, was that Adaeze had already spoken to Chuka 3 days earlier, long before Ngozi ever discovered the messages on Kelechi's phone. She had paid him in cash, a sum large enough to guarantee his complete and total discretion, not to uncover the truth for Ngozi, but to control precisely what truth Ngozi would eventually be allowed to see. Because Adaeze understood something Ngozi did not yet grasp. A confused, suspicious wife who suspected everything but confirmed nothing was still a wife who might stay and fight for her marriage. But a wife who was handed carefully selected, devastating half-truths, truths engineered to break her spirit entirely rather than reveal the full picture, was a wife who might finally, Mercifully, walk away. And once Ngozi walked away, there would be nothing standing between Adaeze and the man she had wanted for 2 long, patient years. 3 days later, Ngozi sat across from Chuka in a quiet cafe in Ikeja, a manila folder resting unopened on the table between them, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mrs. Adeyemi," Chuka said carefully, sliding the folder an inch closer to her. "Before I show you what I found, I need you to understand that surveillance work is rarely as simple as it appears. Sometimes what looks damning has an explanation. Sometimes what looks innocent is hiding something far worse." "Just show me," Ngozi said, her voice barely above a whisper. Chuka opened the folder slowly, revealing a set of photographs taken from a distance. Kelechi, seated across from a woman at a restaurant table, their heads bent close together in quiet conversation, Kelechi's hand resting briefly on the woman's arm as they both laughed at something unseen. The woman's face was turned slightly away from the camera in every single shot, her identity frustratingly obscured by an unfortunate angle, a scarf, a raised menu. Ngozi's hands trembled as she flipped through the photographs one by one, her breath coming faster with every image. "Who is she?" Ngozi whispered. "I couldn't get a clear shot of her face," Chuka admitted. "I followed them for 2 sessions, but she was always careful, always positioned in a way that made identification difficult. I can keep watching, if you'd like." "Given time, I'll get you a clear photo." Ngozi stared at the blurred, half-hidden face in the photographs, a face that was, unknown to her, one of the most familiar faces in her entire life, a face she had looked into 1,000 times across lunch tables and phone calls and midnight tears. She left the cafe that day more shattered than she had been in weeks, yet somehow still no closer to the truth than before. She had confirmation now that something was happening. Some other woman existed in her husband's life, but the not knowing who, the agonizing blank space where a name and a face should have been, was its own particular kind of torture. She called Adaeze immediately from the parking lot, sobbing into the phone as she described the photographs. "I saw pictures, Ada. There's another woman. I don't know who she is, but there's another woman." There was a pause on the line, brief but unmistakable, before Adaeze responded, her voice thick with practiced sympathy. "Oh, Ngozi, I'm so sorry. Come to the shop. I'll close early. You shouldn't be alone right now." And so, once again, Ngozi drove straight into the arms of the very woman responsible for her devastation, seeking comfort from the architect of her own destruction, utterly blind to the truth hiding in plain sight behind every gentle word, every sympathetic embrace, every carefully worded suggestion that had led her, step by devastating step, to this exact moment of heartbreak. That evening, as Ngozi cried into Adaeze's shoulder in the back room of the boutique, Adaeze stared over her friend's trembling head into the mirror across the room, watching her own reflection with an expression that, had Ngozi looked up even once, would have told her everything she needed to know. It was not sympathy in Adaeze's eyes. It was patience, the patience of a woman who could already see the finish line, closer now than it had ever been, and who had no intention of stopping until she crossed it, no matter how many tears her best friend shed along the way. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comments section. Because what neither woman in that quiet back room could have predicted was that fate, or perhaps simple carelessness, was about to hand Ngozi something far more damning than a blurred photograph. Something that would arrive not through a private investigator's careful surveillance, but through a moment of ordinary, human error, the kind that unravels even the most carefully constructed lies. It began the following Friday with a single notification that lit up Ngozi's phone screen while she sat in traffic on the 3rd mainland bridge, a notification from a cloud storage account she had forgotten was ever linked between her phone and her husband's. A new photo had just been backed up, and when Ngozi's trembling finger tapped that notification open, right there in the middle of Lagos traffic, horns blaring around her. The entire carefully constructed illusion Adayeze had spent 2 years building began, at last, to crack wide open. The photo loaded slowly, the way images always do on a bad network in traffic, appearing first as a blur of color before sharpening into focus. Ngozi's stomach dropped before her mind even finished processing what she was looking at. A hotel room, a mirror. Kelechi's hand resting on a bare shoulder, his face turned toward the camera, with the soft, unguarded smile of a man who believed no one else would ever see that photograph. And beside him, captured fully, unmistakably, without a scarf or a turned face or a raised menu to hide behind, was Adayeze. Not blurred, not obscured. Her face, the same face Ngozi had cried into 100 times, smiling back at her from her own husband's phone. Ngozi did not scream. She did not cry. She simply sat there in the stalled traffic, engine idling, horns blaring around her, staring at the photograph until the driver behind her leaned on his horn hard enough to shake her out of the trance. She drove the rest of the way home in complete silence. The photograph burned into her mind more permanently than anything Chuka's blurred surveillance shots had ever managed to show her. She did not confront Kelechi that night. She did not call Adayeze. Instead, she spent 3 days gathering everything. The cloud photo, the messages saved under the letter A, the timestamps from the hotel receipt she had found weeks earlier, the account of Chuka's surveillance, printing and saving copies of every single piece until she had built, unknowingly, a more complete case than any private investigator could have handed her. And when she was ready, she did not choose a quiet corner or a private room. She chose Sunday afternoon, the one day both of them, husband and friend, always gathered together at her house for the family lunch that had become tradition over 8 years of marriage and friendship. Kelechi was setting the table when Ngozi walked into the dining room and placed her phone, screen up, directly in the center of it, the photograph from the hotel room glowing brightly for both of them to see. Adayeze, arriving 5 minutes later with a bottle of wine in hand and a bright smile on her face, froze in the doorway the moment she saw it. "Sit down," Ngozi said quietly. Her voice did not shake. "Both of you, sit down." Kelechi's face drained of color instantly, his hands frozen mid-motion over a stack of plates. "Ngozi, I can explain. Sit down." Her voice cut through the room like a blade, sharper than either of them had ever heard from her in 8 years. They sat. The silence that followed stretched long enough to feel physically unbearable, the kind of silence that presses against the chest and refuses to let a person breathe normally. "I want to hear it from both of you," Ngozi finally said, sliding the phone an inch closer across the table. "Not separately, not with different stories rehearsed in private. Right here, right now, together." Adayeze reached for damage control the way she always did, smoothly, instinctively. "Ngozi, listen to me. It's not what you..." "Don't," Ngozi said, her voice cracking for the first time, though her eyes remained locked on her friend's face. "Don't you dare tell me it's not what it looks like. I have the messages, Ada. Months of them. I have the hotel receipt. I have the photographs from the investigator I hired because you were the one who suggested I hire him. Do you understand what that means? You handed me a stranger to follow my husband while you were the one sleeping with him." Adaeze's composed mask finally slipped, just for a moment, revealing something raw and cornered underneath. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, her voice rising, defensive now instead of comforting. "You had everything, Ngozi. The husband, the house, the children, the life everyone said was perfect, and I just watched from the outside for years, always the friend, never the one who gets to keep anything for herself." The room went silent with shock. Kelechi's head dropped into his hands. Ngozi simply stared at the woman across the table, watching 8 years of friendship dissolve in real time into something she barely recognized. "So you decided to take mine," Ngozi said slowly, each word deliberate, "instead of building your own." I didn't plan for it to happen this way, Adaeze said, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. You planned every single part of it, Ngozi said, her voice rising now, the calm control finally cracking under the weight of months of manipulation laid bare. Every warning you gave me about him was a lie. Every time you told me to doubt him, you were the reason I had something to doubt. You told me to hire an investigator, knowing exactly what he'd find and exactly what he wouldn't, because you paid him yourself to keep your face out of every photograph. You didn't just betray my marriage, Ada. You destroyed my mind for months. You made me question my own instincts while you were the one lying to my face at every single lunch. Kelechi finally lifted his head, his eyes wet, his voice breaking. Ngozi, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. There's no excuse for what I did. I let myself believe I deserved to feel understood somewhere else, instead of fighting to fix what we had. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You're right, Ngozi said, turning to face him fully now. There's no excuse. But at least you're finally telling the truth, without me having to drag it out of you piece by piece. If you've made it this far into this story, you already know how heavy betrayal like this can feel. So type Amen in the comments if you believe truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how carefully a lie is hidden. Adaeze rose from the table abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the tiled floor, her composure completely abandoned now. So what? You're just going to sit here and act like the victim? You were always so trusting, so naive. It was almost too easy. Get out of my house, Ngozi said, standing to meet her eye to eye, her voice steady despite the tears finally spilling down her cheeks. And don't ever call yourself my friend again, not in this lifetime. Adaeze grabbed her bag from the chair, shot one final venomous glance at Kelechi, who refused to meet her eyes, and walked out of the house that had once felt like a second home to her, the door slamming shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the quiet compound. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Ngozi's life. Kelechi moved out temporarily, giving her the space she demanded, while he attended counseling sessions alone, determined to understand not just what he had done, but why he had allowed himself to be so easily pulled away from a marriage he still, despite everything, believed was worth saving. Ngozi spent those weeks in therapy of her own, untangling months of manufactured doubt from the instincts she had once trusted completely, relearning slowly how to separate her husband's real failures from the ones a jealous friend had invented for her. It took nearly a year before Ngozi and Kelechi sat across from each other again, not at a dining table set for confrontation, but at a small quiet restaurant where they had gone on one of their very first dates as a young, hopeful couple. He had asked for one more conversation, not to demand forgiveness, but to finally understand, together, exactly how deeply they had both been manipulated and whether there was anything left worth rebuilding. I'm not the same woman who sat across from Adaeze, believing every word she said, Ngozi told him quietly that night. I don't know if I can fully trust again, but I know now that I was never the problem in this marriage. I let someone else convince me I was. I know, Kelechi said softly, and I let my own weakness make it easy for her to convince you. That's on me. All of it. They did not fix everything that night. Trust, once broken so completely, does not repair itself over a single dinner, but it was a beginning, an honest one this time, built on truth instead of whispered lies, and for the first time in over a year, Ngozi allowed herself to believe that maybe, slowly, something real could still be built from the wreckage. As for Adaeze, the boutique in Ikeja closed within months, her reputation unraveling through the same social circles she had once charmed so effortlessly, as word of what she had done spread quietly from mouth to mouth, the way truth always eventually does in a community built on relationships. She learned, far too late, that the finish line she had spent 2 years chasing had never truly been within her reach at all, because a love built on the ruins of someone else's trust was never a love that could last. Ngozi often thinks back now, to the night she sat frozen on that cold tiled floor, phone clutched to her chest, believing her entire world had ended. She understands now that it was not an ending at all. It was the moment she finally stopped doubting her own instincts and started trusting the truth over the comfort of a familiar lie, no matter how gently that lie was disguised as friendship. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the people closest to you are not always the ones fighting for you, drop a comment below and tell us what part of this story hit you the hardest. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. Thank you for watching until the very end.